All right, we would like to welcome everybody. And as people arrive, I'm going to give people just a minute to join. I see where we are quickly increasing in numbers. So I'm going to wait just another minute before we get started. We are at 40 people joining us. Wait just one more minute here till the numbers slow down. All right, so I would welcome, I am Rochelle Curran-Apps, Executive Director of the Presumpscot Regional Land Trust. We're delighted to have you join us for the first virtual education program, Landslides of the Presumpscot River. The Presumpscot Regional Land Trust is a local nonprofit, and our mission is to engage with communities to conserve, steward, and provide access to local lands and clean water for current and future generations. We exist because hundreds of individuals and families throughout the region are members and support the Land Trust. Thank you to each of you who are already members. If you're not a member, please consider joining our Land Trust. Your support will help ensure we can continue to provide free educational programs like this one into the future. You can learn more about our mission, the trails we provide, how to get involved, and how to support the Land Trust on our website at www.prlt.org. This is a Zoom webinar. You will see you have the option to send questions to the panelists throughout the presentation. The last section of the presentation will be the Q&A. Based on the questions sent throughout the presentation, please use the Q&A button instead of the chat button. We will also host a few interactive polls throughout the presentation and look for your feedback. I am now delighted to introduce our presenter tonight, Irwin Novak, Professor Emeritus of Geology at the University of Southern Maine. His teaching focused on geomorphology and glacial geology. He was former Associate Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences and a member of the Russell Scholars faculty. His research focused on the geology of Maine as viewed from space using satellite imagery. Irwin, thank you for being with us tonight.
You're quite welcome. I'm happy to be here. And since I want to cover a lot of territory, I'll start off quickly. But before I do, we want to ask our first survey question. And you're going to post it, correct?
All right. Here comes the first poll. First poll is, how do you interact with the river? All right, we have half of participants responding. So I'll give it another 20 seconds. Now we have 3/4 of respondents. All right, so I'm going to end the poll so we can see the results. I'm going to share the results. So it looks like this group of participants walking along the shore is the most popular, followed by canoeing, kayaking, and stand-up paddleboard, followed by swimming, and then fishing.
Great. Right. I wanted to point out to everybody that there's some folks along the river who actually drink it. And I think they're my neighbors up here on North Gorham Pond, because it's still Class A waters coming out of Sebago. Okay. Thanks for your participation. The news broke on September 16th, and WMTW did a pretty good job of combining reportage and documentation. And I think it's important to note that the news broke on September 16th, and WMTW did a pretty good job of combining reportage and documentation. And I think it's important to note that the news broke on September 16th, and WMTW did a pretty good job of combining reportage and documentation. And I think it's important to note that the news broke on September 16th, and WMTW did a pretty good job of combining reportage and documentation. And I think it's important to note that the news broke on September 16th, and WMTW did a pretty good job of combining reportage and documentation. And I think it's important to note that the news broke on September 16th, and WMTW did a pretty good job of combining reportage and documentation. And I think it's important to note that the news broke on September 16th, and WMTW did a pretty good job of combining reportage and documentation. And I think it's important to note that the news broke on September 16th, and WMTW did a pretty good job of combining reportage and documentation. And I think it's important to note that some drone footage. So here is a
The
report.
landslide's impact downstream is already evident. Low water levels, a change in color, and visible sediment.
I've never seen it look like this. You know, even in a heavy rain or something like that, you wouldn't get this kind of clouding effect.
Daniel Bishop of Portland Trails is temporarily blocking access to riverside paths, concerned that water could rush when debris is cleared.
Even when it does break through and the aftermath has happened, we can't speak to safety of certain structures.
City officials now working with state experts, such as Lindsay Spiegel of the Maine Geological Survey, who says this could have been worse.
We're really lucky that it's been such a dry summer and that the Presumpscot River is relatively controlled with dams because they could probably hold some water back.
With water levels rising, local leaders hoping for a natural solution, preparing to intervene if necessary.
At this point, it's a wait and see. So long as that water does not rise, it's not going to be a threat to public safety.
Beyond immediate safety, the main concern for Bishop and others is the potential environmental impact of a landslide and possible water surge.
This stuff, that sediment on the bottom has been there for years, and if we get a huge surge of water coming through, it'll stir it up, and then it all will deposit downstream.
State and local leaders plan to meet tomorrow to discuss possible plans, but as we understand recently, that flash flood warning has dropped. We knew that earlier today that water was beginning to flow through the area, so it is very possible that there is a natural water channel which is going through. Hopefully we will learn more from people who are directly involved in this in the near future. The landslides impact downstream.
So where did the landslide occur exactly? And this is a map that shows you, here's Warren Avenue. Home Depot is over here, just past Riverside Street. And the landslide occurred along the Presumpscot. At this point, the Les Wilson Construction Company is right here, just off of Warren Avenue. This image, which comes from the recently released U.S. Army Corps of Engineers report, shows a Google image combined with some of the details that they placed in their report, such as the edge of the fill that filled this area over time, the outfall from Westbrook stormwater, and the Portland Water District water line that they were concerned about. The red dashed line shows the scarp and the path that the slide took, and the portion of the river that was blocked by the toe of the landslide. If in this next image, this is drone footage taken by SAPI. There's no narration in it, but it's really clear and sharp imagery and shows you where the landslide is relative to the mill and the water district property downstream. I might interject a comment or two as we watch it together. Now we're looking upstream towards the mill over here. Warren Avenue, here's the Wilson property, and the Portland Water District, waste disposal, sewage treatment plant, and the blockage in the river. It's going to start up again in a second. There's a little added piece at the end here, as they turn back to where the slide occurred. In the next image, you can see a nice aerial view of the entire slide itself. And I'll be using these terms in the future. The slide scarp is this line here. It comes around, often this is referred to as the head scarp. You can see the sand pile that had been over here has moved down in a large slab. And I'll talk about these slabs a little bit later. So essentially this moved down and laterally, almost as a tableland, but the front edge of it was rolling like the front of a carpet, like this. So where my shirt sleeve is, that's the carpet that didn't get very disturbed, but the front edge is rolling in contact with the bottom, and that's where you see the Presumpscot formation is starting to squeeze out and appear from below. Also, you can see some of the Presumpscot clays in the scarp wall over here on the right. So now we have survey question number 2.
All right, let me pull that question up. So, how many landslides? Here we go. How many landslides do you think there have been in the Presumpscot formation in the Southern Maine area? All right, half of folks have answered. 3/4. Almost everybody's answered. All right, I'm going to end the poll now. Share results. Irwin, what do you think?
Well, I think that, well, I'm glad a lot of people are watching the program. Actually, there's been, in the last 100 years, over 100 landslides in the Presumpscot formation in Southern Maine, as not counting parts further down east in the Androscoggin. So quite a number have, and I'll hope to show you why as we go along. So I would like to, in the first video, the WMTW footage, they mentioned Lindsay Spiegel's name, and I want to suggest people go to the Maine Geological Survey website, easily Googled, and there's a whole, if you type in landslides, there's a whole number of publications, really recent publications about it. Lindsay has become the expert person in Maine Geological Survey, focusing on landslides and using modern technology like LIDAR to investigate them. These are PDF files. There's these 2 publications shown here, easily downloadable for everyone. So how did I've been using the Presumpscot formation as if everybody knows about it, but a lot of people in Southern Maine know about it because of the encounters they've had in gardening or paddling along the river. They see the places where you see bluish gray, sometimes tan when it's dried out materials. And that sediment deposit has been named the Presumpscot. I'm kind of proud of my relationship to it, if one can say that, because my major professor in graduate school, Arthur Bloom, named it. And he named it after viewing it all along the river, but in particular, exposure in Falmouth. And now, wherever you find that same kind of material in Maine, it's called the Presumpscot Formation, and there are equivalent clays in Quebec, along the St. Lawrence, and in places, in some places in New Hampshire. But we have the bulk of it, and here's why. With it, depending on who you read, in the past 1.5 million to 2 million years, an ice sheet covered most of North America, expanding out from Hudson Bay all the way beyond into the edge of the Gulf of Maine. And this pile of ice was perhaps 7 miles thick over Hudson Bay. And by the time it got to our neck of the woods, it was about a mile thick over Portland. But it was thick enough to get over the top of the White Mountains and all the way out to the edge of the continental shelf. So this ice sheet spread as if it was, as if you were pouring pancake batter in the center of Hudson Bay. And as that pile of batter, snow and ice accumulated, it spread out in all directions. There were other glaciers, but the Laurentide ice sheet is considered the largest at this particular geologic time. As I said, some people would call it the last million years. People are now talking more, 1.5 million approximately. So let me go back for a minute. As the ice expanded, the water that had been in the sea lowered because precipitation was deposited in the form of snow, was deposited on the continents. So sea level dropped as the glaciers expanded. And this is work that explains that, or a diagram that explains that. This was produced by a group at the University of Maine at Orono, in which they traced the path of sea level back to about 12,000 years. So around 12,000 years, a little before, maybe 1618, when the ice was way out, sea level was low. So sea level got as low as, say, 55 feet below present sea level. Then as the ice melted, sea level rose quickly at first, but then in the last, say, 6,000 years, slowly. So the ice on the continent melted, it went back to the sea through melting at the edge of the ice, and sea level began to rise. But there's one other thing that was taking place that's important to keep in mind. The weight of the ice, imagine anywhere from 6-7 miles thick to 2 miles thick, was so great that it depressed the crust. So if my arm is the ice, the weight of the ice depressed the crust. And as the ice moved back, the land didn't just go boing and pop right back up. It rebounded, as we say, very slowly. So the sea was able to go far inland before the rebound stopped. At the ice margin, which this is a diagram, as the ice retreated, and Maine is kind of special because the ice retreated with the sea lapping up against it. Unlike other states that were glaciated, there was land that you could walk along till you got to the ocean. Mostly in Maine, the sea lapped up directly against the ice as the ice melted at its margin here. Now, keep in mind that even though the nose of the glacier was melting backwards, it was still flowing outwards from Hudson Bay until the ice got so thin that it wasn't able to do that. In the process of moving out from across North America, it scraped up the bedrock, ground it up, pulverized it, took big chunks and blocks, carried it with it within the ice, and then at the margin where the ice was melting, some places it deposited sand and gravel, and some places the finest particles of the sediments that had been ground up in the ice were released into the ocean. And that process of fine-grained particles being deposited in the ocean caused the little clay-sized particles to stick together and formed silts, which are slightly larger than clays, sized particles. And that material, the ground up, pulverized rock and earth and soil that the glaciers gathered along the way, when it got to the sea as fine particles, it was deposited on the seafloor. And that's what this band is. So when we go around Southern Maine, we'll see some places where bedrock is exposed because the glaciers scraped off everything. We'll see some places where the glaciers deposited coarse sands and gravel, which we call till. And other places we'll see the topmost deposit, silt and clay, which, as I said, is called the Presumpscot Formation. So the lower left map on this slide shows the furthest inland that the Presumpscot Formation can be found in the state of Maine. It basically, now this doesn't mean the whole of the southern half or third of the state is covered by Presumpscot Formation. What it says is that in those places you can find it, but as we all know, bedrock sticks out, just like bedrock sticks out in Casco Bay now as islands. Out in the interior, you don't have to go very far from here. You can go to Rattlesnake Mountain, you can go to Douglas Mountain, you can go to Pleasant Mountain, and these would have been islands in this ocean in which the clay was accumulating on the base of the ocean at the margin of the ice. So the ice retreated from around Portland area about 12,000 years ago. So 18,000 years ago was out by the edge of the continental shelf, and it melted backwards and got to our neck of the woods at around 12,000 years ago. And it melted back very quickly, leaving some residual mountain ice around the White Mountains, around Katahdin, small little mountain glaciers. And by 8,000 years, 7,000 years ago, ice had melted out completely from the state. Now the map, the larger map on here shows the distribution locally in which towns, the squares represent 7.5-minute topographic maps. But you can see all of the surrounding towns south of Sebago have detailed maps that show the distribution of the Presumpscot Formation, shown in blue here. So, as I said, it was not just in the greater Portland area where the Presumpscot was deposited, but further north as well. And so in 1996, there was a landslide in Rockland Harbor that was not unlike other ones that had occurred over time. This is the road to the Samoset Hotel, which is off to the upper right of the picture. But what I want to point out is that these slides take on a very familiar appearance. Here's the scarp, and then the flat area that like a tableland, and then the toe of the slide as it ran out into the harbor. So this is, the toe is that edge of the rug I was talking about, but exposed in the rock and the walls of the scarp, the Presumpscot Formation. So what are the properties of the Presumpscot Formation? Most people call it a clay, but actually from a sediment size point of view, it's really silt size, which is slightly coarser in between sand and clay. It also has some fine sand layers in it in places. It's made up of mostly ground quartz, feldspar, and mica. And these are the rocks that make up most of the rocks, the minerals that make up most of the rocks in the state. You have the Sebago granite-like rocks, and then the quartz-bearing rocks that are like the ones that used to be quarried in the Blue Rock Quarry off of Main Street in Westbrook, and it's somewhat like the rocks that are being quarried by Shaw Brothers off of 237 in Gorham. So physically, it is both blocky as it dries and layered because of its depositional sequence over time. And the behavior of it is from very firm to very viscous. And by that, I mean, sometimes you could stand on it and nothing happens. And other times, particularly if it moves or is jarred in some way, it could become viscous. And an example is that, let's say you go to the beach and you have your foot in the sand by the shore, and then you start wiggling your foot, water starts to seep up around it and the grains seem to be separated. And that's what can happen to the Presumpscot formation under some conditions. Usually it's blue-gray when fresh, but when it's a face that's dried out, let's say in a riverbank, it may be tan. So here's some illustrations of it. Here's the blue-gray, or mostly gray in this case, layering. You can see thin layers of sand in amongst it. Sometimes it's much thicker. Sometimes it's overlain by sand and gravel, as it is here. And here's the fine grain Presumpscot formation at the bottom. And in this case, you can see that tan driedness and the blockiness of it when it's been exposed for a long period of time. And then you can see the bluish gray part in places where the blocks have fallen over and exposed what's beneath it. You can also, how do we know it's marine, that it was formed in the sea, is because at the edge of where the Presumpscot formation was being deposited, you find shells. And you can find small clam shells in layers. This was taken, I believe, up in a sand and gravel pit in Cumberland. And this one also, this is my favorite. I had to coerce a student's father to give it up to put in our collection. It's an ophiuroid starfish, a really rare find. Most of the time you find clam shells, conch shells, and chunks of wood. And rarely, as was found in Scarborough a number of years ago, a mammoth tooth and other parts, which now reside in the Maine State Museum. What are the uses for it? This was going to be one of our survey questions, but I decided just to tell. I know that those of you familiar with Portland, bricks, sidewalks, brick buildings, bricks everywhere. And even though it's called the Forest City, it could be called the Brick City too. But the LaChance Brickyard, which was out on 237, where the Shaw Brothers plant is now, is one of the more well-known local ones, Brickyard Hill and Brickyard Cove. There was also Brickyard out in Back Cove earlier in the day. The Native Americans used it to make pottery. Maine settlers used it and produce a product called Maine redware. I asked 2 potters that I know, currently active potters, and they said that it's not used very much now because it doesn't fire well. It cracks on firing, so big pots aren't made from the Presumpscot formation. Pardon me. But the thing that it's used for mostly these days is to cover hazardous waste sites to make them impermeable so water, rainwater, and snowmelt can't get into those waste disposal sites. Well, how did I get into the landslide business? I was teaching a class in September of 1983, a geomorphology class, landscapes, when I got a call from the sheriff of Gorham. There's a big landslide that occurred off of Longfellow Street, which is off of Brackett Street, almost at the Westbrook border. And could I come over and take a look? They were worried about hazards to people working there or coming to gawk at it. And you could see by the time they also put me up in an airplane, so I got this overhead shot. But the yellow line is the police tape, do not cross, to go into it. But pointing out here a number of features, you can see the headscarp, which starts here in the lower right, curves around up to here, and it's actually going down along the left. This landslide moved down and into the Stroudwater River, which is a tributary of the Presumpscot. But you can see there's large blocks, slabs that move downward, blocky terrain, and even a house moved here. What I want to point out, this landslide occurred after 2 things happened. One is they built an access road, which is about a third of a mile long, which piles sand and gravel over the area to get to this house site. And at the time the landslide occurred, there was a well drilling rig over here and its support water tank truck. So this was what was going on at the site at the time. So here's the location. Here's USM campus in Gorham, New Portland Road, Brackett Street, Longfellow Road, and the landslide was this black area. And there was a little smaller one in this meander in the stream. So we brought the class out there to have a look-see at what was going on. And so you see a lot of students with their hands on their hips, learning stuff. And so what was going on was there were 2 vans. One was laying carpet, the other was painting. This is the garage on the right. There's the well drilling rig in the background. And we're standing on the scarp here. Here's another view. This was the pipe for the septic system. And there's another view of the vans here. There were cracks in the ground, secondary scarps, and there's the blocky terrain. In the distance, the river is off. In the distance, you can see it's fall, the leaves are there. Here's the drilling rig, and the rig is being held up off the back wheels because the pipes that went down through the Presumpscot formation about 83 feet hit ledge, rock at the bottom, and it started to chatter, vibrate as the pipes hit the bedrock. And then this landslide occurred. So that might have been one of the contributing factors. So then we started getting serious, taking measurements. This is about 15 feet from the headscarp to the first slab that moved sideways. Here's a view back at the scarp and the blocky terrain in between. And here's a large crevice. This is about 9 feet deep between slabs. And here's a map. This is drawn by my colleague at the time, Mark Swanson. Everything in red is the parts that stretched. Everything in pale greenish blue are places where the land buckled upwards, hummocked upwards. And here I wanted to point out, in the river, just like in Westbrook this past month, was a pop-up of clay. And you can see that here in this aerial view, and you can see it on the ground. This is what it looked like when it blocked the Stroudwater River. So the water is backing up behind this pop-up street feature, and just like in Westbrook, as the water made its way over the top, it became a gray, silty color. This is in places where that pop-up structure occurred. Excuse me. You could see that perfectly gray color of the Presumpscot formation and blockiness of it. Well, as a consequence of that landslide, the Maine Geological Survey, with help from the US Geological Survey, began a study of landslides in Maine. So this would be starting in '83. And using this chart of types of slope failures, we say landslides, the engineers say slope failures. They can occur in different ways. You can have a clear rock fall like the Old Man on the Mountain. You can have rock slides. You can have lateral spreads, which is something like what happened in Gorham and Westbrook. But what happened in Westbrook and Gorham is more like this one. Has characteristics of E, but a little more of a curving failure plane underneath. So we sent out this chart to public works departments, libraries, town councils throughout Maine, and asked them to send us any information about slides that occurred in their areas. And the outcome was to have them send us a survey, and then we plotted them where they were. And the letter designation on this map refers to the letter designations on this slide, on this chart. So you can see D was a very common occurrence, D, 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 and some combination of the two. And down closer to us, a little close up, you can see similarly, very similar slides had occurred historically in our area over time. So what's possible causes? One of the things I was asked almost immediately after the slide in '83 was what caused it? A whole bunch of things could cause it. You could, water, cubic foot of water weighs 62 pounds. If you had 6 inches of rain over 2 acres, that's a lot of weight. Snow, earth piled on the surface. If you weaken the base of a slope, like by river erosion, sorry for the misspelling there. Hopefully it's the only one. Or if you have road cuts, highway cuts, that weakens the base of a slope. If you reduce the internal friction, you could, by increasing pore water pressure, that could be by rain going down through cracks, or by well drilling equipment forcing water into sandy layers. You could also rearrange those oddly arranged clay particles by an earthquake, or from human-induced vibration is possible too. So, where are some of the more well-known historical landslides around our area? So here's the 1983 landslide. And so that one triggered not only the survey that I pointed out a minute ago, but we went into library records and geological records and found a number of them in our area, including an 1831, famous one 1868, a small one in 1849, and the Braham Hall Hill slide, right? I'll tell you more about that in a little bit. This is in the vicinity of where the Maine Medical Center parking lot and Portland glass is on Congress Street. And presumably this one slid all the way across Congress Street out into where Fitzpatrick Stadium is now. So here's Lindsay. I was using satellite images and air photos and airplane rides to get my pictures. She uses LiDAR. LiDAR is the latest technique where you can look at a landscape and eliminate, it sees right through the vegetation. And so the Braham Hall Hill landslide moved in this area and out towards, as I said, Fitzpatrick Stadium. In some of the debris was found a log, and that log was dated at 13,500 years. So this predates Portland glass and Maine Medical Center. Here's the area in which the 1868 landslide occurred. And here's Cumberland Mills right here. It's presumed that the shift and the meander in the Presumpscot River at that location was caused by the landslide pushing, filling the river and then water eroding around it. In the Portland Argus of 1868, they had some pictures, and these are found now in the Maine Historical Society, of the landslide. Then you can see the scarp. All the trees are vertical still. They all moved laterally towards the river. Is another view. In the article in the Portland Argus, people rode out on trolleys. They were selling popcorn, and it was quite, horse and buggies went out to see it. It was quite the attraction in its day. So here's Lindsay's LiDAR imagery of the 1868 landslide, shown in yellow here. Presumably, this is a pre-existing one, 2,700 years, this area here, but you can clearly see the headscarp of the 2,700-year-old one, sewage treatment plant over here, and the toe of the slide that rearranged the path of the Presumpscot River. And as a consequence of the 1983 one, we did an engineering study in this area. And here is this is a Colonial Drive, Independence. This is East Bridge Street over here. So in my estimation, this whole area has been geomorphically rearranged by landslides over, perhaps 8,000 to 10,000 years. Here's a air photo of the same area. And this is the slide scarp. You can still see bits of it. Oops, I'll go back. You can see still bits of the slide scarps of old there. Okay, so it's not just along the Presumpscot where we have landslides. You can have rock slides. This is the northeastern end of Long Island. Here's the air photo of it. You can have them all along the Royal River in Yarmouth and then Chandler River Creek in North Yarmouth. That's what all these little curlicues representing the headscarps are all about. Here's a famous one, it's Bunganuk Cliffs in Brunswick. And here's what it looked like from in an air photo. This slope was endangering these homes. And so we investigated that area as well. But in a picture like this, you can see the meandering of a river can erode the outside of the meander and cause slope failure. Now, I wanted to almost draw to conclusion, say that, I don't know, I guess we're lucky that the Presumpscot Regional Land Trust has preserved a landslide right behind the Great Falls Elementary School. And this is the trail map. I have to embarrassingly say that I hadn't been there until last Sunday in the 44 years I've been here. But I got to walk on this one. The red line was drawn by Lindsay as the headscarp. The green line is the trail that you can walk on. You can get on it, as I understand, from behind the school, and you can get on it also from the towpath bridge, I think, which is down near Blue Seal, feeds and eats. So I urge folks, now, when you go there, you'll say, wait a minute, where's the landslide? You have to get a little bit off the trail and walk to the headscarp, but it's all overgrown, and it's looks hummocky, as this picture shows, but you can see the scarp quite clearly. So I urge you to take a look and go there. The first picture of the bridge was taken on one end of the trail, and this one, which I want to thank Rachel and Toby for inviting me, and the folks at the Presumpscot Regional for having us. The whole purpose of this was to raise public awareness that it is not an uncommon thing. If you asked me, how often is it going to occur? I would say it's like flood maps, a 10-year storm, a 25-year storm, or a 50-year storm. We can't predict exactly, but if you go and look at the past 100 years, the average is about 26 years or a generation, say. So that's why maybe a lot of people haven't heard of it. And the one from 1983 is, I suppose, fixed in my mind and a few others' minds. And now I think Rochelle is going to possibly ask some questions in the remaining time.
Great. So if you have questions for Irwin, now's a great time to put them in the Q&A, and I'll be reading them out to Irwin. The first question is, what are the striations in the most recent landslide?
When one slab of clay moves over another, you get little pebbles that may be in the bottom of it and in the bottom of the upper layer, and so they make marks, or just the pressure of two layers together is enough to make paths. These are not the same as the ones that you might see in bedrock striations, which are formed by big boulders being dragged over bedrock. These are ones that are made by two clay masses moving over one another.
The next question is, can one canoe through the river where there is the recent slide?
I think you might have to ask the Portland Water District folks about that. I went over the bridge at 302 and it was the other day, and it was still a little gray. I mean, I don't know that the river has cut all the way down to its final depth. So I would check with more local folks about that.
Next question, do you know when the Hawks Preserve slide happened?
I think, yes, I thought, I want to say, I thought it was also in 2,700 years. I may be confusing it with the date of that other one, but it is in one of Lindsay or Steve Dixon's report.
It is 2,700
Yeah.
or present.
Yes.
Next question, does the term Presumpscot formation just refer to the blue-gray clay, or does it include a wider range of materials?
Some of the folks at Orono had proposed to expand the name to include some of the fine sands at the top that were deposited in nearly the same conditions close to shore. So, but I've been a purist, maybe because of my link to the namer, to link it solely to the blue-gray silts and clay.
The next question, what impact concerns does the addition of mass amounts of silt pose to organisms in the river?
I defer that to your biology experts, and I'll stick to what I know better. Obviously, I mean, if you're going to get silt, you can impede the breathing and feeding of organisms that live in the river, and fish gills could get stuck. But I found that at Gorham, that within a few weeks, the water got pretty clear pretty quickly.
Next question, is propensity of slide considered when approving a building plan or subdivision plan?
No, not that I know of. It's not, for instance, if you went to get a building permit on a lot, you usually have to show a site evaluator, a soil scientist that's examined the soils to certify that the soils are of a sufficient texture that you could put a septic system there. That's state law, and it involves getting a building permit. But so far as I know, no town has required an engineering study or zoned for likelihood of a slope failing. We do have laws like for flood-prone zones, and we have flood maps, 100-year flood, you have to build higher than, stuff like that. So, but as far as I know, not yet.
The next question is, with Maine Med built on the hill on Congress Street near the slide, is it in a safe location?
I certainly hope so. I've spent too much time there myself. By the way, so I think so. I'm sure for structures like that, engineering studies have been done, and they probably are supporting all the buildings on bedrock and not landslide prone. I want to correct something. My wife just handed me the Hawks Preserve handout that Lindsay gave on one of the walks, and in it, it says that the Maine Geological Survey determined that the Hawks slide is a prehistoric slide. So there was no carbon-14 dating of any wood at that site.
The next question, has anyone proposed to survey the Presumpscot and Royal River watersheds to try and identify locations most in danger of slides due to the presence of the Presumpscot formation? And if it was decided to do this, how could it be done?
Well, it's been done. And not to the detail. This is something that grew out of this work we did in the 80s. It was a landslide susceptibility map. And we decided to make blue, green, red. Green is not a very high probability. A yellow is a low probability, and high is, red is a high probability. But I don't know how to, what do you call it, zoom in on a picture, a portion of this picture without making it go away. So what I would say is that the kinds of information that were gathered for this map included: what is the slope? What is the thickness of the Presumpscot formation? What kind of vegetation? What is the nearness to a river? And other things that could undercut it. There was like 6 or 7 different parameters that were made to try and draw a map like this. Now, obviously, this is very general and covers a lot of towns. And you want to be able to produce maps like this. And I think folks like the Maine Geological Survey have been working, and that's why I recommend those publications earlier on. It's certainly possible to make maps like this by town or by areas. It takes time and the willingness to do it. I think I have one that I've made. I didn't include it. I anticipated the question, so I put this at the end, hoping I wouldn't show it or I would show it. But I have one very similar to it for the town of Gorham, a little closer in.
Next question: was loading from fill material a cause of the recent landslide?
Well, I will just reiterate what I said earlier. That is, a number of different factors can contribute to a slope failure such as this. So loading could be one of them. Vibration could be another one. Erosion by the river at the toe, another one. Now, if you're looking for, and this is where maybe lawyers are better asked the question, what's the straw that broke the camel's back? I don't know. I would say there were preconditions that set the area up for possible failure. The one in Gorham, it appears that the drilling rig vibration on bedrock did it. And elsewhere, I don't know which is the primary cause, but a lot of factors go into it. It's very difficult to say which one specifically. I will say that in the beginning in 1983, people wanted to know which one. I saw like lawyer chatter, but in the end, the people and community of Gorham came together, moved the house that you saw in the picture, moved it away from the landslide and made the person whole. And the community came together to help fix it.
We have time for one final question, which is, if you're along the river, how can you tell you're looking at the Presumpscot formation?
Only in that picture that I had, which was so clearly this blue-green layered formation is like the key to it. But most of the time, soil has slumped off and covered most of the banks of the river, and you can't see it. So it's only in fresh places where some block has fallen off that you may be able to see it as clearly as that. And I mean, I live on the Presumpscot in North Gorham, and there's nowhere along here where you can see the Presumpscot. Actually, we're lucky because this is one of the places where the sand and gravel was deposited. But as you go down the river, a lot of the places have sand and gravel pits adjacent to it. And the clay has been covered over by soil that has washed down over it. So I wish I could say, go to this spot and you'll see it, but that's not always the case, but it's under there.
Irwin, thank you so much for taking this time and sharing with us. We are now at time. We got to most questions, but not all questions. We had a lot of great questions tonight, so thank you all. We did record this, and we are hoping we can post this to our Land Trust YouTube page and be able to share it out afterwards. It'll be our first time trying to do that, so hopefully that will work. Thank you all, and have a great night.
Bye.